A Highlander's Second Chance. Highland Temptations. By Aileen Adams.
Chapter 1. The one day Clyde McMannis always looked forward to was the Lord's Day, the day of rest. He knew well that he was fortunate indeed to make his home and perform his duties on the farm of a fair-minded man such as Rufus McIntosh. Rufus was not the sort to work his men until they were half dead, never giving them so much as a day to themselves. In fact, Rufus insisted that all who worked the land not only had a home of their own on that land, but one day in 7 in which to rest and enjoy the fruits of their labor. Clyde knew, too, that he could have done much worse considering the way his life had begun. Far too many like himself had either gotten themselves locked away for crimes against the crown or against their fellow man, and far more were long since underground. These were the sorts of things he reflected on during his day of rest, when there was less to do. Less to occupy his mind, to turn his thoughts away from that which he would have rather not dwelled upon. That was perhaps the only reason he did at times dread Sundays. The thinking. The remembering. No one would look at him and imagine him to be a great thinker, and to a point they would be correct. He had always gotten further with his fists. Though in reality, more often than not, a fight ended before it began once his opponent caught sight of him. He supposed that to an unknowing stranger, he made quite an impression. He had seen that same familiar look come into a man's eyes on more than one occasion. They normally started out bragging and boasting, their chests puffed out, their heads thrown back in a self-assured manner. They might have been great brawlers truly, perhaps even as fearsome as his mate Drew. And then Clyde would rise from whatever chair or bench or stool was strong enough to support his weight, and they would realize their mistake. And all of that boastfulness, all of that bluster would give way to wide-eyed surprise. And still, sometimes they would at least pretend to be less surprised than they were. After all, a man's pride was always at stake in such matters, and they would not wish to make a mockery of themselves by running or apologizing too quickly. The fact was, Clyde had not a single enemy except for the English army, who he considered the enemy on the whole. Aside from those beasts, he held nothing against any man who'd not done him wrong. It had not always been that way, and there were times in which he recalled his impetuous youth. The days when he'd done nothing to quell his youthful temper and lustful ways. That all changed, and quickly, the moment he first set eyes upon his Janet. Uncle Clyde. A young, cheerful voice outside his cottage stirred him from the reverie into which he'd been moments from sinking. Perhaps that was...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?